What a way to make a living, yeah.
We had a moment, Tom and I, where we were in the Owens lake, the dry lake bed, and it was for the scene where the graboid has smashed itself. They leap across the concrete. The graboid has killed itself by hitting a concrete wall. So we were prepping for that, and we had to dig a trench to put our dead worm body in, and the winds started whipping up, and we were just in a sandstorm, and we had goggles on, and we had our t-shirts wrapped around and we were digging and with pickaxes. And I remember we stopped and looked at each other and we said, we took the Dick Smith advanced makeup course so that we could do this. And we just started laughing. And it was sort of like being, without any of the danger or the physical violence. It was like being in a war, or it was like prepping for a war. Maybe it was like being the guys who had to like dig the trenches, first before the battle started. And then of course we get on the walkie and say, hey, we're way behind schedule. And somebody, Ginny Nugent, maybe, who was the production manager, says, why didn't you guys say something? We have a backhoe sitting here. And they send the backhoe out to us, and then we lean against our shovels. Of course, while the backhoe was working, the wind had died down and everything was fine. And within 20 minutes, the guy did what was going to take us 6 hours to do. So.
And as I've read, it was one of the most intensive scenes to film. Can you walk us through that?
The attack on Walter Chang's store starts with a graboid busting up through the floor. So for those interiors, the store had been built in Valencia on a soundstage, and we shot surrounding footage, and we shot all that. I'm trying to think if the floor itself was a cutaway, but we had a big in the soundstage. There was a big sunken area. It was like a water tank in this sound stage, and they built the store over top of it, and that enabled us to put a big track down, lay a big track. This was Art Brewer and his physical effects guys had this track with a, I think it was probably a Chapman dolly on it, with a boom arm that could do this. So we rigged our worm onto that boom arm so we could get a running start with this thing of maybe 15, 20 feet with 10 guys pushing with all their might and cranking it up right at the right time and hitting those floorboards and busting through. Lots of Fuller's Earth. Ivo Cristanti was a genius with his breakaways and all the sets that he designed. And so we got that initial shot of the creature bursting up, and then we had multiple rigs to get Walter Chang into the mouth of the character, and we came up with this idea of like, what if the tentacles wrap around him, they spike into him, they pull him in, but he gets pulled in and his leg ends up at a weird awkward angle breaking, so the leg is sticking out awkwardly. So we made a little, we cast the actor's leg and made a puppeted leg that sticks out, so that he can look extra pathetic and painful. The actor played it really beautifully. But there was a lot of work in that set, in the attack, of tentacles grabbing things and all the shelves falling over. And that was intercut with work that was done on location, where the roof of the store was pitching and yawing. They called it the rock and roll roof. And it was all built. Again, Ivo had the same sort of limitations that we had, where you weren't really, you didn't really have the budget to do fancy hydraulics and anything like that. So you had to come up with ways that were safe for actors, but also reliable and simple in their construction. So we were doing things that, practical solutions to things that no doubt had been done since movie making began, which was kind of cool because we were out in Lone Pine, where they've been making movies since movies began.
You mentioned Ivo. Can you tell us who he is and what his role was?
Ivo Cristanti is the production designer for the film, and so, you know, on the surface, you would say, oh, okay, he designed the sets and the town of perfection. But when you look deeper into what Ivo did, he was bringing a character to life. Everything in the town was very well thought out and very authentic. You know, you could see the town "Welcome to Perfection" sign that he had actually taken out into the desert and shot up with a rifle so it would get the bullet holes in it. He would put, you know, characters. One of the characters is a ceramicist, and so he would get these ceramics that he would hang, and he would, you know, create the environments for all of these characters. He really had a great understanding of each and every character of it, and the town reflected that character. I think there's something in Walter Chang's market where the name Chang's Market is painted over from the previous market that had existed there, which was a mining town, right? So it was the company store, and you could see the faded previous logo underneath Walters, and that kind of stuff just makes such a difference in a film, and that's, I think, why the town has such texture to it and such believability, which is what he approached his design work of the town in the same way we approach the design of the creatures, which was, you've got to believe these things. They've got to look like they're part of the environment, and the audience cannot for an instant think, oh, you know, that looks fake, that looks like a Hollywood concoction. And I think that's part of what makes Tremors kind of timeless in its look, is that you have these sort of townies that sort of, they could be existing right now, complete with mullets and, you know, Levi's and the buildings and all that great production design. But yeah, Ivo did just an amazing job on the film.
It's unusual for like a horror film to take place in broad daylight and outdoors. So
Yeah.
You guys have to work a lot harder to make it believable.
Yes, the marching order of you know, putting these graboids out in broad daylight was a bit daunting. You know, we had come off of movies like Predator and Aliens, where it's usually set at night, and you have there's a lot that's forgiving and a lot that helps you, because it's what you don't see in horror films that scares you as much or more than what you do see, because it lets the audience's imagination run wild. In this case, we knew at some point there had to be a big payoff where in broad daylight you see these creatures and they've got to be scary. But what was baked into the script, and what is the brilliance of Steve and Brent's writing, is that you had a lead up to it, so that your imagination was already engaged and activated by seeing the mounds of dirt, you know, and things jiggling, and you know, dust puffs and things like that, before you got to see what the creature actually looked like. And then, of course, the mislead that you know, when they pull the tongues off the underside of the truck and you think, oh, that's what it is. It's like a bunch of weird snake monsters. But no, it's only a hint at a larger creature. So it was paid out very nicely. And then beyond that, to take it beyond that, these creatures had characters. They were learning, and they were naturalistic, and they were behaving like intelligent animals. And our characters understood that, so there was that sort of cat and mouse thing going on towards the end of the film, which was an extra level for a non-anthropomorphic character to do that kind of thing was very fresh to us and very exciting.
What happened to the puppets when the film ended?
The puppets themselves, the foam latex that we make the skin out of, is ironically UV sensitive. So when you take things out into the desert, they're just soaking up UV into that foam latex. It's a natural rubber, and it starts to break down. So they broke down pretty well, but we would patch them together and make them usable again for the sequels. So you do see them again in the second and third film. And then for the fourth film, the molds were used to create new, fresh skins. But yeah, they really fall apart pretty badly. They don't survive. They're a lot more delicate. They have a short lifespan, unfortunately.
And there's one in the museum in Lone Pine, I believe.
Lone Pine Museum, I think, has a graboid that I think Steve maybe gave them. That if you were to touch it, it would be crispy. It kind of becomes like a fortune cookie. That's what it feels like, and they break apart. You know, so you have to be very careful with those things.
How were these conceived, and did they cause any problems, or?
The Shriekers, which were the baby creatures that appeared in Tremors 2, had their own unique set of challenges because they had two legs and they ran around. So a lot of the tricks that we were using with the worms to kind of disguise their movement, you really couldn't get away with that on Aftershocks. So we just, you know, resigned ourselves to building them as full scale, but also knew there had to be a visual effects component there, and that's where Phil Tippett and his crew came in. Phil had just done and developed a bunch of technology for Jurassic Park, so now, as what, you know, this is how it happens. Technology is developed for the big projects, and then later on it trickles down to the lower budgeted films. So he was going to be responsible for animating and creating the more athletic versions, whereas in the previous film we had puppets that were the, you know, miniature puppets in miniature sets. So that was how the kind of split worked in that film.
And the Ass Blasters, where did they actually originate from, the design? Was it the Bombardier Beetle, was it?
Yes, there were the Ass Blasters by number 3, of course, we had. This is what I love about Steve and Brent and their imagination, is that they like to find things in nature that are just crazy and just absurd, right? So this was a conversation. By this point, we had the relationship, and this was a conversation that we could have with them, where they would come to us, hey, you know, we're writing the script, and these things, we want these things to fly. So what do you think? What ideas can we come up with that that allow these things to fly, but maybe aren't just flapping wings? So we had a great kind of back and forth conversation with the guys, and, you know, we love nature and all this, you know, we just spend so much time looking at nature footage and looking at the crazy, and we were all in love with this thing called the Bombardier Beetle, which is a beetle that uses as a weapon, it uses two chemicals that when it squirts together creates an explosion. And so it's an organic biological weapon, explosive weapon. And so we thought, well, why couldn't you turn that, like if you just, instead of the Bombardier Beetle pointing his butt at its, you know, at a coyote's nose above it, what if it pointed down at the ground? Would there be enough force that it could propel itself? So that became a very amusing kind of topic of conversation, because obviously it's kind of a fart joke too, right? Like this is how they, but Steve and Brent are willing to embrace those ideas because they are absurd. It's like that moment in John Carpenter's Thing where the head has sprouted legs and it's running away, and some character goes, you got to be fucking kidding me, like what's next, right? So they're very good at embracing those things that a lot of, I think, maybe executives tend to like say, well, that's too strange, or that's not scary. Like, it can be. If the thing blasts and then it's airborne and then it dives and takes somebody's head off, then all of a sudden it's scary, right? So we love that. We love that aspect of the way their minds work.
How do you actually go about blending 3D models with CGI? How does that process work?
In the case of Aftershocks, the CGI technology was relatively new then. So there were a lot of unknowns for us as VFX artists. So we worked closely with Phil and his company to make sure that we were not presenting them with textures or stretchy skin or anything like that that might create a problem for them on that budget. We understand that they could solve any problem with enough money, but when you're talking about a lower budgeted film, you have to be mindful of the budget. So like, for instance, one of the things Phil said was, well, if the legs can be more socketed rather than, you know, skin stretching webbing between leg and body, that would be helpful. So we looked at the rhinoceros, for instance, and said, oh, we like, look at that. Look at how that, there's a big sort of like fender that comes over the top of the thigh that's a big, meaty, armored plate. So we adopted that as a design cue to sort of help them in their animation work. And then, you know, we just would provide them with the models that they could photograph or scan, all the parts and pieces that they need so that the match would be as close as it could be. And then also, you know, for us, we come from an era where you were a little more permissive of continuity kind of mismatches. If it was to get a better dynamic or to improve the action, there tends to be a mindset, a modern mindset where, no, it has to look exact, the full scale thing has to look exact, otherwise it's a failure. And that's not really the case, and Phil saw it that way as well. Like, well, so what, in that shot, their feet, you know, aren't as big because they're that close to the, you know, you can tweak things, you can move it and squish it and it's malleable, and the composite impression cut to cut is what counts in the end. And Phil was a very, because he comes from a practical world and had transitioned into the digital world, he was the perfect guy for Aftershocks.
What tips would you give to an amateur graboid maker?
The amateur graboid maker, yes, there are so many options available with 3D printing and sculpture and all that. I guess it depends. The advice I would give would depend on whether or not you're going for accuracy or whether you're doing your version of it. I'm not at all opposed to fans doing their version of it and extrapolating, and because after all, the graboids are a morphing character, so take them in any direction you want. I like that. It's when you're trying to be exacting to it that the you know, that's when I guess it could become a little more. But I guess I would rather see variations on it than, because we have the films to show us the exact duplicates. And in fact, my company has done some collectibles for Sideshow collectibles of the graboids from our molds of the quarter scale. So there are some things out there, if you hunt, that are very accurate. But I don't know. Show me the graboid of your imagination.
A lady in Bulgaria made this.
Are these the macramists?
This is probably not what you think it is, but check that out.
Oh, so this is that is fantastic. With the macrame, with the tongues. That is fantastic. But tell me about this.
It's erotic underwear.
Someone, has it been worn?
No.
Oh, good. Could I put it on now?
Sure.
Okay.
It's YouTube.
Oh, so this is where the, oh, Bulgaria, you say? Huh. Well, they're a lot more kinky than I thought the Bulgarians. Why? I always thought it was pronounced Bulgaria, a bulgy area, but that's not the case. Although this would indicate, is this average Bulgarian size? Well, do you get a? Do they?
I think that's an 8-incher.
And do they? If it's say a 5-incher, I'm asking for a friend. If it's a 5-incher, do you save on money because there's less material? Do you think?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, this is the kind of thing that I want to see more of. I think the world needs more penis cozies in the shape of a graboid. And this actually goes right back to what Gail Hurd was talking about, doesn't it? So she couldn't have foreseen this. If there was a proper merchandising campaign back then our uncircumcised worms might have been quite a hit. You can imagine all the various products that we could have produced. I like it. I like it. Were there 4 tentacles in the mouth though?
I don't remember.
Or were there 3?
You would know.
I feel like there were 3. But listen, this is, what did I just say? Use your imagination and be like the lady in Bulgaria who likes to keep it real and keep it warm in the bulge area. Tremors, cock cozies. Order yours now. Operators are standing by.
You're quite attached to that.
Yeah, I can't seem to. Oh, look. Oh, it's back. What? Oh, I just here. Here. Let me just hand it.
I threw it at Kevin Bacon the other day.
Sorry.
I threw it.
Damn it.
Subject completely. When you were working on the movie, you shot a lot of home movie footage of all the behind the scenes. What does it feel like when you look back at those tapes now?
I love looking back at our archival footage because, first of all, I mean, you look at it from several different vantage points, right? Like, I look back 30 years later and go, my God, how young we were. Who would have hired us? How could they possibly have thought we knew what we were doing? But then I look at the work and I go, like, oh, that's pretty cool. Especially how it looks in the film. Because there's always things that you pick apart in your mind and things you never liked and you wished you had done differently. But the film is just so damn good, and it holds up so well. It's such a great, monsters aside, it's such a great ensemble film, and the balance of characters and the clearly defined characters' dialogues, beautifully directed, beautifully written. So when I look back at it, I just get a warm, fuzzy feeling, and I'm just very proud to have been chosen to be part of it, because I think anybody who worked with that group of people making those creature effects would have come off looking good. And I know I'm being a little self-effacing when I say that, because it's not that I'm saying that what we did wasn't a good portion of it, but it was just such a lightning in a bottle. It was a great time and a great group of people. And I think when you watch the movie, it's one of the movies that from that era that I've worked on personally, that I can say it holds up better across the board than some other movies that I've worked on.
So that must have been quite an amazing feeling on set.
Yeah. The opportunity that came along at that point in not only our careers but other people's careers as well, the enthusiasm was just sky high. So all of those things, like, the very cold, the very hot, the very dusty, the exhaustion factor, those were all sort of secondary to me, because the vision as it was laid out in the script and the opportunity that we were given was so, it was just, it was worth the work, and it still is worth the work. Because at the end of the day, you don't really think so much about the hardship or the problems you had, because the end result was so great. And even if the movie hadn't been that great, it would still be one of my fondest memories, because the people were so wonderful, and the location was so beautiful. And, you get up every morning and see the sunrise at Lone Pine and, go eat at a little funky cafe, and there was like one bar in the town where the crew would meet and fraternize and have a couple of beers, and you go back to the little dumpy motel, and it was just it was filmmaking heaven.
Is there a sentence that kind of sums up your experience on Tremors?
I wish I had the single sentence that sums up Tremors, because I would ask the marketing department to put it on the poster so that the movie would be a big, gigantic hit theatrically. A single sentence. You may have noticed I have trouble just speaking in. My sentences tend to be Dickensian with lots of commas and, but Tremors to me was sort of the little movie that could. It wasn't a big budget movie, but what it had going for it carried it even past a bad box office performance into cult status, and then beyond cult status and into a franchise that continues on to this day. In that regard, it's one of the most successful movies I've ever been involved with. And I think it has shown me that everything is not sort of the way Hollywood presents it, where it's sort of, you know, like you go out with a big ad campaign, and if it doesn't make, you know, 20 million bucks in its first weekend, everybody's disappointed. Tremors was an independent style film that sort of like latched onto people's hearts and has only continued to grow. So that's a great lesson as an artist. If you're an artist, you know, you have an intent for your piece of artwork, and it could go one way or go another. It has its own life, and you can't really evaluate the success of your piece of art. It's up to others to evaluate it, and that changes over time. So you can't even worry about it. You just have to control your own process and enjoy the process as you execute, because there isn't really anything else under your control other than the process. And Tremors was a great example of that for all of us. How is that for a sentence?
I'd say that's a couple of paragraphs, but we can...
It was a couple of paragraphs. You know what? You do the podcast thing where you click a button and it goes at 1.5 times the...
Is there anything else you wanted to say about Tremors?
All I want to say is I am booking a trip to Bulgaria as soon as I'm out of this chair. What would I say about Tremors? No, I think at the risk of just getting maudlin and starting to tear up. And you know, it was a big turning point, you know, for me and my career, Tom Woodruff's as well. So I'm just glad I will continue until my dying day, hauling myself out for any way to be a part of the celebration of Tremors, because I think it's worth it, and I think anyone that sees the film, generally it sparks something in them. I showed it to my daughter, I think, at a screening when she was about maybe 12, and she just said, "Dad, I have a huge crush on Kevin Bacon." And that's one thing, you know, that's something. Who doesn't have a crush on Kevin Bacon?